This is from Glenn Greenwald, Thursday, April 30th, 2009. Top Senate Democrat bankers own the U.S. Congress. Senator Dick Durbin on a local Chicago radio station this week blurted out an obvious truth about Congress that, despite being blindingly obvious, is rarely spoken. And this is what he said, quote, "And the banks, hard to believe in a time when we're facing a banking crisis that many of the banks created are still the most powerful lobby on Capitol Hill. And quite frankly, they own the place," end quote. The blunt acknowledgement that the same banks that caused the financial crisis own the U.S. Congress, according to one of that institution's most powerful members, demonstrates just how extreme this institutional corruption is. The ownership of the federal government by banks and other large corporations is manifested in literally countless ways, none more effective than the endless and increasingly sleazy overlap between government and corporate officials. We also have here down the list former Barney Frank staffer, now top Goldman Sachs lobbyist. Goldman Sachs' new lobbyist was recently the top staffer to Representative Barney Frank of Massachusetts on the House Financial Services Committee. Unbelievable. Then, nobody even tries to hide this any longer. The only way we could make it more blunt is if they hung a huge Goldman Sachs logo on the Capitol dome and then branded it into the foreheads of leading members of Congress and the executive branch. One might think it would be a big news story for the second most powerful member of the U.S. Senate to blatantly state that the Congress is owned by the bankers who spawned the financial crisis and continue to dictate the government's actions, but it won't be. The leading members of the media work for the very corporations that benefit the most from this process. Established journalists are integral and well-rewarded members of the same system, and thus cannot and will not see it as inherently corrupt. As Newsweek's Evan Thomas said, their role as members of the ruling class is to prop up the existing order, protect traditional institutions, and safeguard the status quo.
Well, it's just amazing what's happening in our economy. Of course, as Dr. Carley said, the flu pandemic level 5, as we're seeing, has just overshadowed the economic meltdown and even what's going on with the investigation into Bush and some of his officials and the torture, which we're going to go into next hour. But as I sit here in Iredell County and get your opinion, Brian, I mean, my friends are just more and more and more out of work. I mean, it's just continuing. None of these bailouts, none of this stuff has worked, and yet they're continuing to talk about more and more. Chrysler, GM broke, Chrysler filing Chapter 11. What are your thoughts on it?
And it's all throughout, this timeline, just one step after another towards a world government. We go through phases. First, it was the terrorism phase for several years. We have to get this phantom enemy we can never see, like we were discussing with Dr. Carley. And then Al Gore comes out. It's this huge environmentalism phase, just coincidentally when all the hurricanes were hitting. And then, now, of course, we went through the financial crisis, and now we're going into this health crisis, all of which are steps towards a world government.
Yes, and we've got some information the listeners sent us. We'll do next hour on the global warming, and we've got several news items we're going to cover next hour. Then we want to take phone calls from the listeners. We want to give you the opportunity to sound off on this and any other issues that you might be interested in. So you're listening to The Real News, therealnewsradio.com, libertynewsradio.com here on WSIC 1400, WDSL 1520. We will be back in 7 minutes.